Hi, welcome back to section 10.7. The next thing we're going to talk about is complex numbers. So complex numbers, basically if A and B are real numbers, then any number of the form A plus BI is a complex number. Basically, we've got a real part A and we have an imaginary part B. Okay? When you're performing operations with complex numbers, just remember that your i's are like terms. Okay? They act kind of like variables in a way. Your i's are going to be like terms with each other. Also remember that I squared equals -1. And also remember that I is a radical, so you can't have an I in the denominator of a fraction. Alright, so let's just practice a few operations. My first one for you is in example 4, part A. We're going to subtract a little bit. We're going to have -9 plus 4i. So you'll notice we have a real part and an imaginary part. That's a complex number. Minus, we've got -9 minus 8i. So another one with real and imaginary numbers. So let's go ahead and distribute our subtraction first, just so we can really see if we're adding or if we're subtracting. So minus a -9 would really be plus a +9. Minus a -8i is the same thing as plus a +8i. So now we can see if we're adding or if we're subtracting our values. Then we can just add and subtract like terms. So I've got a -9 plus 9. Well, that'll be 0, which is great. We also have a 4i plus 8i, which would be 12i. Just imagine they're x's or something like 4x plus 8x would be 12x. It's the same thing. You're adding the coefficients and then the i's are still there, okay? And part B, we've got 6 minus 4i times 2 plus 4i. So I'm going to distribute. 6 times 2 is 12. 6 times 4i would be 24i. -4 times 2 is a -8i. And -4i times +4i would be a -16i squared. Okay, so far so good. From here, let's see, we've got a 12. We can add some like terms here. 24i minus 8i would be a +16i. We also can remember that I squared is the same thing as -1. So -1 times -16 would be a +16. Then we've got some more like terms. We've got a 12 and a 16, which we can add together. 12 plus 16 is 28, and we still have a +16i. So there would be your answer on part B. All right, let's talk about division. So we're going to find our quotient, and just remember, I is actually a radical. It's the square root of -1, so it can't stay in the denominator and be considered simplified. So the first one I've got for you is 1 plus I over I. Okay, so I, just remember, I is the square root of -1. You need 2 of them to take it out of a square root. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply by I. And whatever you do in the denominator, you've got to do the same thing in the numerator so it stays equivalent. Okay? So now I've got 1 times I, which is I, plus I times I, which is I squared. In the denominator, what you're going to do is you're going to have an I squared, okay? We know that I squared is the same thing as -1. So now I really have I plus -1, or I minus 1 in the numerator, and I squared, which is -1 in the denominator. I can go ahead and divide everything by -1 to simplify a little bit further. I divided by -1 would be -I, and -1 divided by -1 is a +1. So that's a little bit more simplified than what we had above. Okay? What if we have more than one term in the denominator? So something like 6 plus 2i over 4 minus 3i. This is where you multiply by the conjugate. So the conjugate is where you have the same 2 terms, but the opposite sign in the middle, okay? Because when you multiply by that conjugate, your middle terms divide, or basically cancel out, and you have a perfect square minus perfect square, which takes care of your square roots, okay? And remember, whatever you multiply by in the denominator, you need to multiply by the same thing in the numerator. So the conjugate of negative 4 minus 3i is 4 plus 3i, and that's what we're multiplying by in the numerator and denominator. Alrighty, from here, we need to distribute. So I'm doing 6 times 4 is 24. 6 times 3i is 18i. 2i times 4 is 8i. 2i times 3i would be 6i squared. In the denominator, I've got 4 times 4, which is 16. I've got 4 times 3i, which is a positive 12i. I have negative 3i times 4, which is a negative 12i, so you can already see how those are going to cancel out in a minute. I also have negative 3i times positive 3i, which is a negative 9i squared. All right, we have lots of simplifying that we can do from here. In the numerator, we've got some like terms in the middle. We have 18i plus 8i, which is 26i. We also have an I squared. I squared is the same thing as negative 1. Negative 1 plus 6 is negative 6. And the denominator, it'll look pretty similar. We've got some i's that are like terms in the middle. 12i minus 12i is 0. So now we've got 16. And we also have another I squared, which is negative 1. Negative 9 times negative 1 is positive 9. Then we have some more like terms because we can do 24 minus 6, which is 30. So we've got 30 plus 26i in the numerator. And the denominator, 16 plus 9 is 25. And we are finally done. This is the simplified form for part B. Now it's your turn. You get to try one and show me how much you've learned.